Please take them off, she whispered, voice flickering like a lantern about to go out. The sun out in Mesquite County cracked fence posts and split old porch wood. Wade Coulter knew that heat, knew how it could make a man hard, or break him in two if he let it. He spotted her at the far edge of Dry Creek Outfit, right where the wire met the boundary of what he called home. She stood barefoot in the dirt, the hem of her dress stained and frayed, a coarse burlap sack tied tight over her head. Her wrists were red, roped raw. She didn't cry, didn't try to run. She just waited, shoulders squared like she'd made her peace with whatever came next. Wade didn't ask questions. Folks out here had a way of carrying too much pain for strangers to fix with words. He walked to her slow, boots crunching the baked earth, every movement steady. The knot was mean, tied by someone who wanted it to hurt, going on and coming off. His hands, scarred from years of splitting rails and branding cattle, worked at the burlap, unwinding it careful as he could. It took a good 3 minutes, long enough for sweat to run cold down his back. When the sack finally slipped off, she didn't flinch or sob. She just blinked at the light, blinking out of habit, not hope. Her eyes held years he'd seen before, on men back from war, on women leaving graves behind. Not the eyes of someone cursed, but someone who'd survived cruelty no sermon could wash away. Wade knelt in front of her, keeping himself between her and the sun so the light wouldn't hurt so bad. He pulled out his tin cup, filled it from his canteen, and handed it to her with 2 hands. She drank slow, not a drop wasted, not a word spoken. He took off his hat, letting the sweat dry on his forehead. "Nobody ought to be trussed up like a sack of seed corn," he said, voice low but solid. Her voice was dry, nearly gone. "They say if you look too long, you'll get cursed." Wade shook his head, not unkind. "Curse is just a word cowards use. I never did believe in that kind of magic." Wind came up, running through the ocotillo and rattling the barbed wire. Somewhere behind them, a murder of crows cawed at the sky. Wade's old pocket watch, cracked but ticking, made a soft, patient sound against his vest as he bent to gather up the sack and the rope. He didn't ask her name, didn't press. He just helped her stand, gentle but sure, letting her lean if she needed. Together they walked slow back to the small woodhouse near the pump. The door squeaked open on its hinges, smelling of pine tar and last winter's smoke. Inside, the kitchen was dim and close. Wade set a battered kettle on the stove, started a fire in the old iron box, and dropped a couple of potatoes in to boil. The girl, no, the young woman, sat on the edge of a wooden chair, clutching an old blanket he handed her, watching the flames but not really seeing them. He moved quiet, letting the silence settle, not in a hurry to fill it. After a while, he slid the tin plate toward her, half a potato split right down the middle. She nodded, the tiniest sign of trust, and ate slow, each bite like it cost her something. As dusk crept up the windows, Wade stoked the fire and checked the door lock. Outside, the wind ran along the wire, bringing in the scent of creosote and a promise of cooler night. The two of them, strangers by any honest measure, sat in the hush of the little cabin, neither asking for much, neither offering more than they had to give. Sometimes in the West, that's as close as folks come to a prayer. There's a certain kind of quiet only found by a fireside, after the worst of the day has done its damage. In the soft glow of Wade's kitchen, the hush felt thick as honey, stretching long as the evening shadows on the floor. The kettle sang low. The old iron stove gave off a friendly heat, clicking now and then as it settled into the night. Wade split a big potato with his jackknife, sliding the larger half across the table to the girl. He didn't fuss or watch her eat, just went about fixing another cup of water, setting it down within easy reach. She ate slow, mindful, keeping her eyes lowered as if she'd forgotten how to be looked at kindly. There was a knock at the door, more a soft brush than a true rapping. Doc Ada Merrill, hair pulled back with a scrap of calico, stepped in without waiting for an answer. Ada had a way about her, a voice low and steady, hands gentle as river water. She set her bag down, gave Wade a look that said more than words, and went to kneel beside the girl. "Let's take a look at those wrists, honey," Ada murmured. She dabbed at the rope burns with a cloth soaked in salve, worked with care around angry red marks, old bruises stacked on new. "These didn't happen in a day," she said, soft but certain. Glancing up at Wade, he grunted, "No, ma'am. Some folks pick up habits like other folks pick up dust. Hard to shake both ways." Ada checked the girl's face for fever, brushed hair back from her brow. "Whoever did this, they did it out of practice, not passion. The West's full of men thinking a person's just a thing to be swapped or sold. Not in this house, Wade." He nodded. "Not as long as I'm breathing." The girl let her shoulders relax just a touch, as if something in Ada's voice loosened a knot inside her. She curled up in the old blue blanket Wade had left by the chair, eyes growing heavy. It wasn't long before her breathing slowed into a sleep so deep it belonged to children and the dead. Wade and Ada shared a look as the fire flickered. Ada poured herself a little coffee, sitting on the edge of the kitchen table, her boots swinging just above the floor. "Word'll get out," Ada said finally. "Nothing in sagebrush stays hidden long." "Let it," Wade replied, voice like gravel but gentle at the edges. "She'll stay here as long as she needs." Ada stood, squeezed Wade's shoulder in passing, and left as quietly as she'd come. The house settled deeper into itself, timbers creaking with the memory of storms past. Wade sat in the rocker, eyes on the embers, listening to the small night sounds. The kettle ticking, a mouse somewhere under the floorboards, the soft rise and fall of another person's breath in the room. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine pitch and wood smoke, the kind of smells that cling to you for years. He stayed awake long after Ada had gone, just watching over the young woman sleeping by his fire. Didn't need to know her story yet. The West had a way of carving those tales out slow. For now, she was alive, and that was enough. He checked the door one last time, made sure the latch held. Then, in the hush of his small home, with the fire dimming low, Wade let himself rest too, knowing sometimes the hardest part of surviving was simply letting yourself be still. In Sagebrush Crossing, news travels on the wind, sometimes faster than the dust can settle. The morning after Wade brought the girl in, the town was already whispering. It started at Widow May's boarding house, where a drifter with more stories than teeth muttered about seeing a red-haired ghost by the fence at Dry Creek. By noon, every stoop and storefront had their version. At the blacksmith's, Caleb Burns hammered a stubborn shoe onto a mule, jaw clenched against the gossip buzzing around him. "She's a witch," one ranch hand said, "or a Comanche runaway. Nobody good comes to town tied up like a sack of meal." Caleb just grunted and let his hammer do the talking. Over at the telegraph office, Sadie Bell fingered the latest wire, a clipped message from the South, full of merchants' codes and words like lost property and retrieval requested. She frowned, lips pressed thin, nothing clear, just shadows and hints. She wrote it up, handed the copy to Sheriff Hank DeWitt, who gave a low whistle and tucked it in his vest. Mid-afternoon brought a hush to the saloon as the door creaked open. Two men stepped in off the main street, boots clean as Sunday and hats pulled low. They moved easy but carried themselves like men used to getting their way. The bartender caught Wade's eye, who'd come in for a sack of flour and a few nails, and nodded just once toward the strangers. Back at Dry Creek, the heat was thick. Ella stood in the yard, hanging laundry on the line, her motions careful, almost invisible. The world outside the fence moved quick, but inside the homestead time seemed to slow. The two strangers rode out from town, dust trailing behind. By sundown they came up the lane to Wade's place, horses breathing easy. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just sat there, looking at the small house as if sizing it up for an auction. Wade met them on the porch, his old shotgun still hanging above the door, untouched. He didn't need to reach for it, yet. Ella watched from inside, hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes wide, fixed on the shadow of the men beyond the glass. The taller of the two, Reed Tanner, dismounted, boots crunching the gravel. His voice was smooth, practiced. "We're looking for a young lady, red hair, came up missing south of here. Word is she might be limping a bit. Quiet but real pretty if you can get past the silence." Wade stared back, face cut from stone. "Haven't seen her. Haven't seen much of anything lately." The second man, Tuck Harrell, gave a crooked smile. "Funny thing, this country. Folks come and go, but trouble, she sticks around." Wade's eyes didn't leave their faces. "Nobody keeps a person out here like they'd keep a calf in a pen. If you're looking for something that don't belong to you, best ride on." Reed shifted, eyeing the sack of flour by the door. He seemed about to push further, but Wade's stance said he'd gone far enough. The wind picked up, rattling the old screen and sending a loose feather tumbling down from the porch beam. Hawk feather, sharp against the gray boards. Finally, Reed shrugged, swung back up into the saddle. "We'll be around. Town's not so big a man can hide much for long." "Suit yourself," Wade answered, voice even as a plumb line. They turned their horses and rode off, but not before glancing back just once, cold and measuring. Wade watched until their shapes blurred into the dust and the light. Inside, Ella let go of the table edge, breath shaky but unbroken. Wade set the flour down, his jaw tight, but his hands gentle when he passed her the last cup of water from the pot. Night came, slow and heavy, as if waiting to see what those men would bring back with them next. There are some boundaries in this world. You don't need paint or wire to mark. Sometimes it's the way a man stands, feet apart, shoulders back, eyes set steady as a stone fence. That tells you where the line's drawn. Dawn broke slow over Dry Creek outfit, the kind of golden hush that makes you feel every bird call in your bones. Ella was already outside, her feet in Wade's old boots, a battered shirt tucked into a borrowed skirt. She hung fresh-washed clothes along the line, hands moving with a quiet that was almost reverent. The air was sharp, cool, full of promise. Wade walked the southern fence line, a hammer in one hand, a rough plank in the other. He drove a new signpost deep into the dust, "No trespass," painted in his own careful block letters. The wood creaked under his grip, the echo rolling out over the field. He stopped now and again, looking out over the land, feeling something old stir in his chest, a mixture of pride, fear, and stubborn resolve. Doc Ada Merrill came by as the sun climbed higher, riding up on her old gray mare. She found Ella in the shade of the cottonwood, folding a faded quilt. Ada took her hands, showing her how to breathe through the shakes that came without warning. Deep, slow breaths, out through the nose, counting to 4. "Panic's just a fast horse," Ada said softly. "You can outlast it if you don't try to outrun it." Ella listened, nodding, pressing her hand to her chest as if reminding her heart to keep steady. Down by the barn, Caleb fixed the pump handle, cursing it in soft tones, while Widow May dropped off a loaf of cornbread and a jar of wild honey. The world, for a morning, seemed to be holding its breath. By midday, Sadie Bell thundered up the lane, cheeks flushed, braid bouncing. She slid off her pony, waving a telegram. "There's a wire from the south," she said, breathless. "Somebody's using legal words, talk of a writ of retrieval out of El Paso. Says a property's gone missing and is to be returned. No questions asked." Wade read the slip, lips tightening. "Paper don't make it right," he muttered, folding the telegram and tucking it into his vest. Ella, sitting nearby, plucked a hawk feather from the ground, tucking it into the seam of her old blanket. Her eyes were calm now, fixed on the wind moving across the grass. "They'll come back," she said, more statement than fear. Wade nodded, pausing by the new sign at the fence. "Maybe so." "I'm tired of running," Ella whispered, voice low but clear. Wade looked her way, his own voice as sure as bedrock. "Then we stand." By afternoon, Sheriff Hank DeWitt showed up, slow-moving but sharp-eyed. He listened to Sadie, read the telegram, and walked the fence with Wade, neither man saying much. Finally, Hank took his badge from his pocket, wiped the dust off, and set it on the kitchen table. "You're not alone out here," he said simply, letting the badge sit where the sun could find it. The hours drifted by, the wind bringing with it the memory of storms and the promise of more to come. Ella hung another shirt on the line, the feather now a secret token at her shoulder. Wade watched from the porch, hammer resting at his side, every line in his body saying plain, "This is where the world stops for her, and any man looking to cross had best think twice." Out west, sometimes you draw a line not for yourself, but for the souls who've run out of places to hide. Sometimes the worst harm in the West doesn't come from a gun or a fist, but from a piece of paper dressed up in red ink and fancy words. On a day when the sun hung heavy and mean over Sagebrush Crossing, trouble arrived at the saloon on the end of a bar tab and a lawyer's grin. Vince Maddox showed up with the noon train, boots polished, suit wrinkled but expensive. He was a man who bought and sold futures, called in debts, and let the law do his dirty work whenever it suited him. That afternoon he planted himself at the corner table, poured a finger of rye, and waved the barkeep over. A slip of paper passed hand to hand, a writ, so the whispers went, drawn up by some clerk with a shaky conscience down at Mesquite County office. Across the room, Sheriff Hank DeWitt watched, eyes narrow, as Maddox had the writ posted on the town board by the doors. Folks gathered in twos and threes, reading the broad, mean script, notice of retrieval, property lost or absconded, to be returned to the undersigned without delay. Signed, V. Maddox. At the bottom, a broken seal bled wax into the dust. Caleb Burns spat on the ground, jaw tight. "Coward's paper," he said under his breath. "Real men don't hide behind stamps and signatures." At Dry Creek, the air had a different tension. Wade came back from town with news heavy as an iron skillet. He handed Ella the telegram. She traced the words, lips barely moving. "You ain't a thing to be handed back," Wade said, voice quiet but cut from iron. "Not by him, not by any man." As dusk slipped in, Widow May made her way up the lane, apron pockets bulging. She tore the bottom half off the posted writ, tucking it deep into her apron, and shook her head. "Nobody comes into my boarding house looking to reclaim a life, not while I'm stirring the pot." That night, Wade and Ella sat in the kitchen, the hush broken only by the pop and hiss of burning pine. Doc Ada stopped in, rubbing tired eyes, and looked over the official paper, running her finger across the seal. "That's not the right clerk's hand," she murmured, "and this year's wrong. The law's only as clean as the man who pays for it." Sheriff Hank came later, eyes hard as river stones, and read the writ by lamplight. "I know this trick, and I know Maddox," he said. "It's a scare tactic, law done dirty, but if you stand your ground, so will I." Night stretched long, and out in the black, coyotes sang and the wind shifted. Wade checked the shotgun, made sure the back door was barred. Ella rolled the torn writ into a tight coil and fed it to the flames, the paper curling, the words turning to ash. But a paper threat, burned or not, has a way of lingering in the mind. Sleep came slow to the little house, and somewhere beyond the fence, hooves drummed a warning on the hardpan. Trouble was biding its time, gathering in the dark. No lanterns swinging, no drunken voices, just the slow, measured sound of hooves crunching gravel in the dark, as if death itself was taking its time. It was the third night since the writ appeared, and Ella hadn't slept more than a handful of hours, not really. She sat by the fire, fingers tracing the ridges of a hawk feather she'd found that morning, thinking about storms and silence. Wade moved around the small house like a shadow, boots soft on the floor, every muscle wound tight. He checked the window, the shotgun over the door, then nodded once, quiet as a prayer. The first warning came on the wind, a ripple in the dry ocotillo and a flicker of horses on the edge of the homestead. Wade stepped out onto the porch, the night wrapping around him. He could feel the presence of 4 riders, see their silhouettes holding back, half in shadow, half in moonlight. The leader, Reed Tanner, dismounted first, boots crunching as he approached. Tuck Harrell flanked him, with Bode Lang and Silas Orr holding their horses a few paces behind, eyes hard as winter iron. Reed held up the folded writ, waving it in the faint glow. "You know what this is, Coulter," he called, voice flat. "Hand her over. No one's looking to make this ugly." Wade didn't move, didn't blink. "It already is," he replied. "If you want trouble, come step across this line." Before Reed could answer, the cabin door swung open behind Wade. Ella stood barefoot on the threshold, a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked straight at Reed, her voice calm but sharp as a brand. "You beat me, you sold me, left me for dead out in the sand. You said I'd bring nothing but ruin, so how come you're the one shaking now?" Bode shifted uneasily, and even Tuck seemed to lose a bit of his swagger. Reed tried to bluster, but the words caught in his throat. "You belong to the man who paid, that's all there is to it." Wade's hand hovered near the shotgun, but he didn't raise it. His voice dropped to a rumble. "You don't own her, nobody does. I said right out, so you better listen while you still can." There was a moment, a long, brittle pause, where it seemed like everything hung on a thread. Then maybe it was the way the wind kicked up, or maybe it was the look in Wade's eyes, but Reed stepped back, the others following his lead. They mounted up in silence, turned their horses, and melted into the dark, the tension snapping as soon as they passed the old boundary sign. The only sound left was the deep, tired sigh of Ella on the porch and the restless shifting of the hawk feather in her hand. Inside, neither she nor Wade spoke. There was no need. The battle tonight hadn't been fought with bullets, but with truth and the kind of courage that doesn't make a noise. Ella sat down by the fire, not crying, not shaking, just breathing like she hadn't been able to in years. Wade took the old blanket from the hook, wrapped it around her shoulders, and sat down nearby, just to share the silence. That night, for the first time, sleep came easier to both of them, though somewhere out past the fence line, trouble still watched, waiting for its chance. There's a special kind of hush that settles over a house after a threat has passed, thin and fragile, like frost on a window pane. That was how Dry Creek outfit felt the next morning. The silence wasn't born of fear, but something closer to relief. Hard-won and unsteady, the sun broke pale over the fields. Wade was already at work before the light stretched over the hills, his sleeves rolled up as he repaired the old hand pump by the barn. Each stroke of the wrench, every grunt and scrape, was a way of putting the world back in order. His hands were steady, but his mind ran circles, thinking of the 4 men in the dark, of the girl inside, and of the thin line between danger and home. Inside, Ella was up too. She moved slow but with purpose, her old wounds stiff but not enough to keep her from the morning. She opened windows, letting in the clean desert air, then made her way outside, boots shuffling in the dust. She walked the fence line, one hand trailing along the wire, counting posts, marking the land not as something to hide from, but as something she was beginning to claim. For the first time her back was straight, her chin lifted, if only a little. Caleb Burns stopped by with a tin of nails, and a loaf of Widow May's sourdough, grumbling about mule shoes but leaving both gifts by the porch. "If you need a hand with that pump, holler," he said, but didn't linger. Folks in Sagebrush Crossing knew when to help and when to give a person space. Sheriff Hank DeWitt rode in just before midday, dust caked on his boots, a letter tucked in his vest. He nodded at Wade, gave Ella a tip of his hat, and sat a while in the shade, writing out a note for Judge Sutter, the traveling magistrate due through in a week's time. "Figure it's time the law put some weight behind its words," he said. "Can't have Maddox or his boys thinking they can twist things up forever." Ella listened, saying little, but watched as Hank folded the note and pressed his badge to the table for a heartbeat before pinning it back on. She wondered if he knew how much that small gesture meant. Later that afternoon, Widow May came by, arms full of shirts and stories. She told tales about her late husband, a man who'd once wrestled a steer for a bet and lost his britches in front of the whole town. Ella smiled, just a small, lopsided grin, but it was the first since she'd come to Dry Creek. The sound of laughter, real, honest laughter, drifted through the open kitchen window, surprising even herself. As dusk deepened, the air turned cool and sweet. From the backyard came the clear, bright singing of May's granddaughter, a girl not more than 7, skipping rope and mangling the words to an old folk tune. The sound wound its way through the house, settling over Wade and Ella like a blessing. That evening, as the light faded and the first stars winked out above the Ocotillo, Wade found himself sitting on the steps, watching the world settle. He thought of scars and of how sometimes the land and its people needed time to heal. Not from wounds you could see, but from the old, silent kinds that take root deep down. In the hush of that night, nobody spoke much. Ella dozed by the fire, her breath easy for the first time in memory. Wade rocked slow in his chair, the old house creaking in the soft breeze, and let himself believe, for a few minutes at least, that the worst had passed. Sometimes healing in the West is quieter than you think, and harder won than a gunfight ever could be. By mid-morning, a dust plume marked the old trail, stirring up anticipation and a bit of worry. Folks in Sagebrush Crossing had learned to watch for visitors. Out here, a stranger's arrival could mean trouble or hope, or both tangled together like barbed wire. It was Widow May who first saw the battered wagon limping up the wash, creaking and rocking in the ruts. At the reins was a woman with hollow eyes and the posture of someone who'd lost too much sleep. Next to her, slumped against a ragged quilt, was a small boy, face smudged, curls wild, lost deep in a heavy sleep. The wheels groaned as the wagon drew up near Dry Creek outfit, where Wade and Ella were stringing laundry beneath the sharp Arizona sun. Wade stepped forward, a hand resting near the knife on his belt, but the stranger's voice called out, tired but clear. "My name's Mary Duggan. I'm looking for Ella Finch. We were together before they split us in San Angelo." Ella froze, the sheet in her hands tumbling to the ground. For a moment she looked so young, so startled, Wade felt the air thicken. Mary climbed down, her knees shaking, and took the little boy in her arms. Ella moved as if drawn by something deeper than memory, meeting Mary halfway, steadying her with a gentle touch. Inside, Wade put water on to boil and fetched an extra blanket. Mary's words tumbled out in snatches about Texas, the wagons, the nights locked in a rail car, the sharp voices and the clatter of chains. "I thought I was dead," she whispered, "but the thought of Ella, she kept me moving." Ella didn't cry. She set a hand on Mary's shoulder and led her to the kitchen, sitting her near the stove where the warmth could do its work. The boy, Charlie, slept on, a thumb tucked in his mouth, the burdens of the road forgotten for an hour. Doc Ada soon appeared, tending to Mary's bruises and the boy's thin cough. "There's more of us out there," Mary said quietly. Not just me. There's others, scattered, hiding, trying to get away. Wade stood at the window, arms folded. The day felt heavier now, as if each new arrival brought with it all the old weight of the world. Still he nodded, his resolve firming. There's room here, he said simply, voice carrying into the corners of the room. Maybe not soft beds, but enough roof for the ones who need it. The kitchen filled with new sounds, Mary's soft tears, Ada's soothing words, the gentle snore of Charlie by the stove. Ella knelt, tucking the boy in with an old blanket, smoothing the hair from his brow. For the first time she looked at home in the little house, her face open in a way Wade hadn't seen before. Later, while the sun settled red and round behind the low hills, Sadie Bell stopped by, telegram clutched in her hand. She'd sent word back south asking after the writ Maddox was waving. Something smells off about it, Sadie said, eyes sharp. The office in San Angelo can't find the right seal. Might be Maddox is playing with dirty paper. As the evening cooled, Wade led the wagon to a dry patch by the barn. Mary and Charlie would sleep in the loft, and Ella saw to it they had bread, water, and a promise that the door would be locked tight. That night, with the lamp turned low and the weight of new voices in the house, it felt like Dry Creek was becoming something more than just a patch of hard ground. It was turning into shelter, a place where the wind couldn't quite reach every sorrow, but where, for a little while, people lost could rest easy. Sometimes in the West, it only takes a crack of kindness for the light to get in. Out here, the desert rain is rare as mercy, but when it comes, it don't ask permission. It tears down hillsides, fills the arroyos with muddy torrents, and washes the world clean, at least for a while. That morning, Ocotillo Wash ran brown and swift, the air heavy with the smell of wet creosote and clay. Inside Dry Creek, the family, such as it was now, woke slow to the patter of drops on the tin roof. Mary's boy, Charlie, coughed softly. Ella wrapped him in a quilt, and Wade fixed coffee, his movements steady as the sunrise. Even trouble seemed to pause for a moment in that small kitchen, where there was enough warmth for everyone to borrow a little. But storms never last, and neither does peace. Not long after noon, as the rain eased, a sharp clatter sounded from the barn, a sound out of place, quick and nervous. Wade motioned for Ella to stay put, and he stepped outside, boots splashing in the new mud. There, behind the half-open door, stood Reed Tanner, coat and boots slick with rain, eyes wild and desperate. "Don't want no trouble, Coulter," Reed stammered. "Just need the girl. Maddox is losing patience." Caleb Burns, who'd come by to check the fencing, spotted Reed and raised a hand. "That's close enough, friend," he said, voice level. But it wasn't the threat that made Reed stop. It was the thin copper wire strung knee-high at the barn door, a bell tied at the end. One careless step, and the little alarm rang out sharp and clear. Within moments, Sheriff Hank DeWitt thundered up, coat flapping, a rifle across his saddle. "Stay where you are, Reed," Hank barked. Reed froze, his face drawn tight as old rawhide. The lawman took in the scene. A scared man, a barn full of witnesses, and a forged writ Reed tried to pull from his pocket. Hank tore the paper in half, holding it to the rain. "Wrong clerk's hand, wrong year. You boys think you can bully your way through with fake law?" Sadie Bell arrived, breathless, a telegram in hand. "The office in San Angelo answered," she said. "That writ's no good. Seals from another county, and the date don't match." Then, in the shuffle, Silas Orr, muddy to the waist, slipped trying to hide behind a wagon. He tumbled out, landing hard, and as he stood, a slip of paper fell from his shirt. A registration for Maddox's freight wagon, but missing the rightful owner's name. Hank picked Silas up, not rough but firm. "Get up, son. Still got a chance to act like a man." Silas looked down, ashamed, and nodded, just once. Caleb shook his head. Mud covers a lot, but it can't wash away a lie. The rain stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving the air sharp, full of the scent of earth turned over. The tension eased, just a notch. Hank pocketed the evidence and nodded to Wade. "Looks like we'll be having a hearing, right here on your porch, Coulter. Till the judge rides in, you hold the line." Ella, watching from the doorway, felt something shift. For the first time, the law seemed close enough to touch. Real as the fence, solid as the ground beneath her feet. That night, the house was quieter than usual. There was no sense of victory, but a little more hope. The storm had done its work, washing away more than just dust, leaving behind a line that, for once, even the law could see. Sometimes it takes a flood to show you who's willing to stand and who's just waiting for the mud to clear. It wasn't a courtroom, but in the West, justice takes whatever shape it needs to. That afternoon, the front porch of Dry Creek Outfit became the most important place in Mesquite County. The planks were swept clean, 2 benches pulled up, and a handful of folks gathered in the July heat. Each one bringing their own piece of the story. Sheriff Hank DeWitt called things to order, his voice low and steady. He sat at one end of the porch, hat on his knee, rifle across his lap, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Wade stood nearby, arms crossed, the lines of worry in his face deepening as more townsfolk arrived. Doc Ada with her battered satchel, Widow May in her best black dress, Caleb Burns with his hat in his hands. Even Sadie Bell, the telegraph operator, joined, her wire reports folded neatly in her pocket. On the other side, Reed Tanner and Tuck Harrell shifted on their boots, wary but still holding to their story. The writ, now muddy and torn, lay on the porch rail, a symbol of just how much damage a lie could do. Doc Ada spoke first. She showed Ada the rope marks on Ella's wrists, the bruises that told their own story. "This girl's pain didn't start on this ranch," Ada said, her voice trembling only a little. "It's old, the kind you get from being treated like property, not kin." Sadie produced the telegrams, messages from Texas and San Angelo, each one another nail in Maddox's legal coffin. "The writ's forged. Dates don't match. Wrong seal. I've got the proof right here," she said, voice thin but unflinching. Caleb recounted the bell wire trap at the barn, the way Reed tried to sneak in during the storm. "Honest men don't come crawling through the mud, Sheriff," he finished. Finally, Ella herself stepped forward. She looked right at Reed, her chin lifted. "You know my name. You know what you did back in Texas, selling me like a bale of hay. The man you owe money to, he's the one who wrote that writ. You all know it now." There was a long silence then, a heavy one. For the first time, the faces on the porch shifted. Doubt became certainty, suspicion gave way to anger, then shame. Maddox's name, passed between them, became a brand no one wanted. Sheriff Hank picked up the writ, examined the torn seal, and looked out at the crowd. "Paper don't make a person property, not in my county. Ella stays here under my protection until Judge Sutter comes, and if any man thinks different, he'll have to answer to all of us." Widow May broke the silence, carrying out a tray of cornbread. "Let's eat first," she said. "No one makes good decisions hungry." People relaxed, just a hair. The hearing was done, but the feeling lingered, like the memory of a hard winter, fading but never gone. The lines drawn that day would hold for now, with every neighbor keeping watch. As the sun dipped low, the group drifted home, some on foot, some by horse, their steps just a little lighter. On the porch, Wade sat with Ella, neither one saying much, both listening to the last songbirds of the day. Justice wasn't finished, but it was closer than it had been in a long time. And for the folks at Dry Creek, that was a start. When a man like Vince Maddox sees his tricks start to fail, he gets desperate. That week, trouble found every crack it could squeeze into. Maddox went back to Mesquite County Courthouse, pressed his thumb on every tired clerk, and paid for fresh red wax to stamp new dates on old lies. He sent his men to block the road in and out of Sagebrush Crossing. Wagons lined up to make sure the judge's route was muddy and slow. Wade caught word of it as soon as he brought in the cows one dusky evening. Widow May, always with her ear to the rail, brought news with her morning loaf. Judge Sutter's not due for another 2 days, and Maddox's wagons are choked up at Cottonwood Crossing. Someone means to stall. Caleb rode in, dust and sweat in his eyebrows. They're setting up to grab Ella if she's moved, Wade. They got folks watching every road south. He patted the handle of his hammer, as if it could do more than fix fence. Inside the kitchen, tension rattled like spoons in a drawer. Mary kept Charlie close. Ella washed up but never set her back to the door. Late that afternoon, Sadie Bell appeared with a telegram. Judge rerouting. Your warning reached him. Her smile was tight, but there was a glimmer of hope behind it. The real break came when Silas Orr, still streaked with mud and shame from the failed night raid, knocked at the back door. He carried a battered ledger and a scowl. I done wrong, Wade. Maddox never paid what he owed, not in dollars, not in kindness. He keeps a list, names, debts, what he bought and sold. I'm tired of being part of it. Sheriff Hank was already at the table, pouring black coffee, eyes sharp. If you want to turn it around, Silas, now's your chance. With a shaking hand, Silas slid the ledger across the oilcloth. Pages showed transactions, dates that matched up with Ella's story and Mary's too, amounts, places, initials in Maddox's mean hand. Outside, Maddox's wagons rattled past, iron-bound wheels crunching the gravel like bone. His men didn't ride up to Dry Creek, just watched, cold-eyed from the road. Hank studied the ledger, then put a big, calloused hand on Silas's shoulder. You did a hard thing, son. Takes guts to say you were wrong. They let Silas eat at the table that night. Not a word about the past, just stew and cornbread, the clink of spoons, the hush of folks who'd seen too much and wanted to forget a little while. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, the lonesome wail of a train whistle floated through the evening, Judge Sutter's engine working its way up from the south. Justice was rolling closer, iron on rails, and this time the crooked wouldn't have a say in how the story ended. The desert light spilled sharp and gold over Sagebrush Crossing as folks filed into the old clapboard church, every pew filling slow with the dust and heat of high summer. The courthouse in Mesquite was too far and the road too dangerous, so justice came to the church. Wooden rafters, simple cross, oil lamps lit against the gloom. Judge Enoch Sutter was a tall, bony man with blue steel eyes and a coat dusty from the rails. He unpacked his papers at the altar, the Bible and the law, sharing space on the same rough table. Wade stood behind Ella near the front, his shoulders wide as the church doors. Doc Ada, Widow May, Caleb, and Mary all pressed close, forming a quiet shield. Mary kept Charlie in her lap, rocking him slow while she watched Maddox's men line the back wall, arms folded, eyes mean. Judge Sutter began, his voice dry as mesquite bark but carrying through the rows. He listened to Sheriff Hank's account, flipping through telegrams, reading the writ, turning it this way and that, holding the broken wax up to the lamplight. Dates don't match, he said. Wrong county. Not legal in this territory or any other. Maddox tried to interrupt, waving another document. Sutter's gavel struck the table, sharp and sure. Sit down, Mr. Maddox. You'll have your say after we hear the injured party. Doc Ada showed her sketches, tracing the pattern of old bruises on Ella's arms, the scars of rope and iron. You can tell a lot about a man by the marks he leaves behind, she said, letting her eyes linger on Maddox. Then Ella spoke, her voice steady, stripped of fear. She named the places, the dates, the men, how she was sold, moved, locked away. Mary nodded, silent tears in her eyes as if Each word unlocked a memory she'd been forced to carry alone. The ledger Silas brought sealed the truth, page by damning page. Judge Sutter tapped the gavel again, all quiet but the church bell in the wind. There is no claim here, only a crime. The writ is void. The law protects the living, not the trade in souls. He signed a warrant right there, handed it to Hank. Take Maddox into custody pending trial for fraud and trafficking. No one cheered. No one clapped. Maddox was cuffed at the church door, shoulders hunched. All his fine words turned to sawdust. His men slunk away, the spell broken. Widow May led the congregation in a hymn. No one sang strong, but every voice tried, holding each other up in the old way. Wade squeezed Ella's shoulder and Mary wept into Charlie's hair. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting the dust in gold. Hank turned to Wade as folks began to drift out, the echo of justice still hanging in the air. Your fence line is safe now. For the first time in a long while, the law stands beside it. Ella stood in the aisle, not chained by paper or fear anymore, the heavy air inside the church replaced by something like hope. And just like that, with a gavel's rap and a handful of good people willing to bear witness, Dry Creek was free of Maddox's shadow. Late summer sunlight poured over Dry Creek like honey. Every shadow stretched long and forgiving. The troubles that had haunted the ranch for so many nights had blown out, leaving the air soft, still, and just a little stunned. Inside Wade's kitchen, Mary kneaded bread. Charlie stacked firewood with the earnestness only a child could bring, and Widow May sat by the window darning socks, humming a hymn almost too quiet to hear. Ella stood at the little pine chest by her borrowed bed. Her hands were steady now as she slid open the top drawer and reached for the coarse burlap sack, the same one they'd tied over her head when she was left out on the fence line. She ran her thumb along the rough weave, not with fear but with a calm that came from looking back at the worst and finding herself still standing. She stepped out onto the porch, sack in hand. Wade watched from the top step, arms crossed, eyes soft with understanding. Mary followed, wiping her hands on her apron, while Doc, Ada, Caleb, and even Sheriff Hank, off duty for once, leaned in the doorway, quiet witnesses to something that felt sacred. Ella walked slowly to the boundary fence. The sign Wade had painted, "No Trespass," caught the sun, bold and clear. With a care that was half prayer, half letting go, she looped the burlap sack over a strand of wire and tied it off, loose enough for the wind to take it whenever it wanted. The breeze picked up just then, tugging the sack, fluttering it like a flag. No one chased it when it finally broke free and sailed out over the brush. A hawk feather spun in the current, catching on the porch rail before drifting away. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The act was so simple, but every heart understood its weight. Ella was done hiding, done letting shame or fear mark her. Her scars were hers, but so was her freedom. Wade stood beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the far hills. "You were never what they tried to make you, Ella," he said, voice like deep water. "Not then, not now." She nodded just once. "It's over," she whispered, her voice neither broken nor triumphant, just sure. Doc Ada hugged her, Mary squeezed her hand, and even Hank cleared his throat, tipping his hat against the sun. The fence, the field, the faded sack, each became part of a story bigger than pain, a story that would linger in the land long after their own voices were gone. As the light faded, they all returned to the kitchen. The lamp glowed warm on the table. Mary spooned beans into bowls. Charlie giggled over some secret with Widow May, and Ella stood for a moment at the doorway, watching the wind carry her old burden away. In her hand, she held the hawk feather, a token not of what she'd lost, but of what she'd reclaimed. Sometimes in the West, it's not a bullet or a fist that sets a person free, but a simple letting go, and the knowledge that someone is there to bear witness. Mornings at Dry Creek Outfit came gentle now, the heat already lying in wait out past the cottonwoods, but the fear was gone. Wade opened the back door before sunrise, letting in the cool. He set a coffee pot on the stove and sat on the porch, elbows on knees, listening to the world settle into its old rhythms, birdsong, hoofbeats, the scrape of a child's boot on the step. Inside, Ella folded fresh laundry with Mary, quiet laughter between them. Charlie sorted nails in neat piles by size on the kitchen table, beaming every time he got one just right. Widow May strung a line of red chili peppers over the door, whistling a tune that echoed up from her days as a young bride on the plains. Even Caleb came by, less gruff than usual, trading fence posts for a mug of hot coffee and staying longer than he meant to. No one spoke about the sack or the night rides or Maddox's men. The scars were still there, but they'd grown faint like old wagon tracks faded by wind and time. Instead, life pressed forward in small, certain ways. Mary and Ella tended an herb patch behind the house. Doc Ada showed Charlie how to splint a stick for a stray dog, and the sheriff's badge rested easy in Hank's vest, unused. Sometimes in the pink hush before dawn, Ella walked the fence line with the hawk feather tied in her hair, each step sure and quiet, as if she were taking attendance of the morning sun. She waved to Wade as she passed the porch, her smile quick and shy. "Looks like another fine day," she'd say, and Wade would tip his hat, the words sticking with him long after she was gone. More than once strangers showed up, tired, battered, some with children, all with that same wary hope in their eyes. The back door never locked, not from the inside, not against anyone who needed a seat at the table or a patch of floor by the fire. Each new soul was met with a simple meal and the same old promise: "You're safe here, nobody owns you." The house filled with the sounds of living, pots clanging, someone humming, the crackle of cornbread in the skillet. At night, after supper, they'd sit on the steps and watch the sky blaze orange and purple, stories drifting like smoke, a little softer each time. Some stories hurt, but nobody had to tell theirs alone. One evening, as Wade sipped coffee and watched the dusk slip over the fields, Ella settled beside him, quiet and steady. They didn't talk much, never needed to. The comfort was in being known, in sharing the peace they'd both worked so hard to build. "If you're breathing, you still got a chance to do right," Wade finally said, turning the old truth over like a smooth stone. "Out here, that's about all you can ask for." Ella nodded, eyes shining in the last light. "We're still here, aren't we?" And that was enough. So the house stood, doors open, light spilling warm across the yard, ready for anyone thrown out by the world to find their way home. It wasn't grand, but it was sturdy, and most of all, it was free. When the gun smoke clears and the prairie wind carries the day's dust away, what remains is not the violence, but the quiet. Two souls finding shelter in each other, a hearth lit against the dark. Out here, survival is hard, but keeping hope alive is harder still. If this tale stirred something in you, I'd be grateful to hear your thoughts. Even a simple word in the comments, just a 0 or 1, lets me know you were riding along with us on this trail. And if you'd like to join me for the next journey into the Old West, make sure you're here when the fire's lit again.